We are honored today to welcome back Dr. C. Freeman. She is a 2024 Chef Fellow located in Los Angeles, California, and a board-certified psychiatrist who specializes in adult and geriatric psychiatry for underserved populations. In this session, Dr. Freeman will focus on the topic of mental health equity, examining its intersections with climate change and discussing equitable solutions that can be implemented at the community level. Rather than use our time to provide a further description of her impressive work, we are placing a link to her bio in the chat. The general format for today will be one 40-minute presentation, followed by questions and answers from our audience. We ask that you put comments, links to any resources that you may recommend, or any questions that you may have for the presenter in the chat box at any time during the presentation. We will get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A period. We ask that you please keep yourself muted so that we are not distracted or disturbed by any extraneous noise. Dr. Freeman, we welcome you back and we're happy to have you. You may begin.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you the connection between climate change and mental health, and to emphasize our duty to pursue mental health equity. Perfect. All right. I have no disclosures. Next slide. I like to start my presentations with expressions of gratitude. Had it not been for the organizations and people that are listed on this slide, I would not be giving this talk today. I entered the climate health space through organized medicine because I wanted my voice to matter. And I knew it would carry further when joined with others. I believe deeply in the power of collective advocacy. By aligning with colleagues, sharing lived experiences, and learning from one another, we strengthen our ability to shape policies that move us closer to true health equity. I entered this world through my parents. During Hurricane Harvey in 2017, they, being well into their 90s, were trapped upstairs in their home for 3 days before they were finally rescued. I remember feeling helpless, scared, and far away. That experience changed something in me. It made climate and mental health personal. But I just can't shake the thought, what happens when it's my turn? Who's coming for me? I don't want anyone I love to feel that same fear that I felt. That's why this work matters. It's not just policy, it's personal. Next slide. Today, I'll cover the definition of mental health equity, connect climate change to emotions, review my capstone project, and leave with actionable ideas. Next slide. But first, I want to normalize the human experience of stress. Think for a moment, what's the funniest or most irrational thing you've ever done while stressed? Well, I'll tell you, once I went to a club. I've been to a club more than once, but on this particular time that I went to a club, I got so heated from dancing that I took off my jacket and I set it down for 2 songs. I mean, literally 2 songs. But apparently, someone needed it more than I did and walked off with it. House keys, car keys, everything in the jacket. Once I got outside the club, I did what anyone stranded, sweaty, and locked out would do. I got a shoe shine. I figured if I couldn't go home, I might as well look polished. Well, that was my climate adaptation moment, finding shine in the chaos. Next slide. Next slide. So, what is mental health equity anyway? Well, everyone deserves a fair shot to achieve their highest level of mental well being. And achieving this requires removing social, societal, structural, and systemic obstacles such as racism, under-resourced systems, discrimination, and inequitable access to care. That limit to mental health for historically marginalized populations. I want you to think about what's the biggest barrier to mental well-being in your community. Is it stigma, access, safety, or something else? Imagine living in a farming community hours away from the nearest psychiatrist. There's one primary care doctor who's retiring and no therapist within 100 miles who accepts Medi-Cal. This is daily life in many rural areas in California, especially in Central Valley and Northern California, where I practice. These mental health deserts leave residents with minimal access to care, even as they face rising stress from climate-fueled disasters like wildfires, drought, and extreme heat. Now, layer in the trauma. A generational farm is lost due to heat waves that destroyed crops. The stress manifests as sleeplessness, depression, and hopelessness. But without providers nearby, people suffer silently. And when they finally reach care, it's often the emergency rooms, jail, or nothing at all. Lack of infrastructure in rural zones creates a vicious cycle of underdiagnosed, undertreated climate-related mental illnesses or mental illness health distress, especially for low-income, aging, and undocumented populations. In many Black, Latinx, and immigrant faith communities, mental illness is still seen as spiritual failing. It's not a medical condition. A teenager confides in her church group that she's overwhelmed with anxiety about school, the future, and wildfires that keep her indoors for days. Instead of being referred to a therapist, she's told to pray harder or get right with God. This isn't malice, it's cultural tradition. But faith-based stigma can delay or prevent people, especially youth, from seeking help. For LGBTQ plus individuals or those questioning gender identity in religious households, the barriers become even more complex. Without culturally competent engagement between public health systems and faith leaders, trusted messengers can unintentionally reinforce silence, shame, and isolation when community-based healing is needed most. Next slide. So what's the connection between climate and the mind? Next slide. The effects of climate change overlap different aspects of health of the individual and as and has a larger societal impact on communities. In addition, there are some special populations that are a greater risk for climate change effects, whether it be pregnant women, those who work in the out of doors, elderly, those who may have mobility issues, as well as young children. Now, if your body gave a weather report during climate chaos, what would it say? Would it say something like, this is your nervous system reporting live? Humidity levels high, patience level low, and a 70% chance of silent rage by noon? I don't know, but I want you to pause and think. When the air is smoking, the news is heavy, and your community is stressed, what is going to be your personal forecast? Local residents report strong winds of overwhelm with scattered feelings of helplessness. These aren't just metaphors. Our bodies literally respond to climate stress. Not long ago, I was visiting my family in Florida and decided to walk to the store. It was just a few blocks, I thought. But 5 minutes in, the sun said, bet. By time I called a car, I was sweating, lightheaded, and silently praying for cloud cover. When I got in the car, the driver looked at me and said, "You doing okay?" I told him I was conducting a heat resilience field test. And he said, well, you know you failed." And I said, "No, I pivoted." And that's leadership. That is how climate stress sneaks up on us, even when we think we're prepared. Next slide. Mental health is influenced by direct exposure to climate-related events and by indirect pathways such as anticipatory anxiety or vicarious trauma, resulting from observing or learning about the experiences of others. We know that heat is associated with aggression and sleep loss. Poor air quality is associated with chronic anxiety, and disasters most definitely are associated with trauma as well as grief. When we talk about sleep disruption, whether it be extreme heat, poor air quality, environmental noise, such as storms or power outages, they interfere with sleep cycles. Stress also activates the nervous system, making it harder to fall asleep, stay asleep, which only compounds anxiety and fatigue. We're not made to live in survival mode forever, but climate chaos keeps the alarm bells ringing, even when there's no clear danger in front of us. Constant uncertainty, like wildfires, floods, and even climate-related financial strain, keep the body in high alert in a fight or flight state. So this leads to elevated cortisol levels, which we know can cause immune suppression, memory problems, irritability, and burnout over time. Climate events can also trigger acute anxiety, racing heart, shortness of breath, dizziness, and chest tightness. And for people with past trauma or chronic stress, these responses may be more severe or longer lasting. Next slide. As a Chef Fellow, My capstone started with one guiding question. Where do people turn in a time of crisis, especially when mental health services are out of reach? For me, the answer was pretty easy. I'm a preacher's kid, and even though I didn't grow up in Houston's Fifth Ward, which is one of the poorest, lowest income areas of Houston, my family's church was there. And it was in a community that was shaped by generations of systemic disinvestment and environmental justice. That church, it didn't just serve spiritual needs, it became a trusted anchor during storms, struggles, and celebrations. It stood at the intersection of faith, resilience, and resistance in a neighborhood where some of the earliest environmental justice organizing took root. I want to stop for a moment and explain for those who may not be familiar with the Chef Fellowship that part of the work that we do is to develop a project that we feel can help others, that can bring justice to communities. And given the fact that I was a geriatric psychiatrist with the background that I just mentioned, the concept of emotional healing in a community that needed it most was something that I wanted to do. Not only do we get the benefit of being exposed to experts in the fields and learning about all the tools that are available to us, we also can play a role in contributing solutions. Next slide. So the Chef Capstone Project isn't just a deliverable. It's a community prescription for climate healing. I created the Black Church Climate and Mental Health Toolkit to support the sacred spaces already doing the work by equipping them to respond to climate chaos with compassion, culturally grounded education, and mental health resilience. From the pulpit to the pews, churches are uniquely positioned to reach people who may never walk in a clinic, but they'll show up for choir rehearsal or Sunday prayer. Now, this toolkit is an offering, a bridge between public health and faith, between trauma and healing, and between environmental justice and spiritual justice. If I gave my project a title, it might be a movie title. It might be something like Pews, from the pews to the people, a lyrical journey of justice where churches drop knowledge, not just sermons. Or Soil and Soul, where roots run deep, Black faith, mental health, and resilience meet on sacred ground. Take a minute and think about what's anchor in your what what's an anchor in your community that could play a similar role. Barbershop, food bank, maybe even a corner store. For those climate health fellows, I want you to take a minute and think about How does your project or climate work promote mental health equity? Does it give everyone a fair shot at achieving their highest level of mental health well-being? Well, if the answer is no, I want you to consider at this time addressing that particular aspect. And when you think about your capstone project, what would the movie title be? Or if you had to explain your project to, your grandma or someone in your local community, how would you describe it? Next slide. So the focus of my toolkit was to address mental health impacts of extreme heat. It was specifically tailored for the African American church community. In this toolkit, it addresses the mental health challenges of extreme heat and offers resources to support emotional and physical resilience. Some of the components of the toolkit: education on heat-related health risks. This includes informative materials on how extreme heat impacts mental health and physical well-being. It also has some healthcare strategies, guidance on managing heat-related stress, hydration, and sleep. It also provides crisis resources, such as access to local mental health support for crisis situations. And recognizing that the church certainly serves as a major community support system, it also provides peer support networks with the idea of building community resilience through church-based support groups. And what has been a particular benefit of having done the Chef Fellowship has been able to partner with other fellows in projects that work or work that we're trying to do in local communities. And what I mean by that is that this toolkit is ever evolving and is yet to be formally implemented, but it's being developed in partnership, collaboration with a Black church in the Los Angeles community, whose lived experience and leadership continue to shape the content of the toolkit as well as its direction. And together, we're building a resource that centers on cultural relevance, community wisdom, and climate resilience, which is grounded in faith, guided by equity, and open to growth. Now, one of the things that could not have been anticipated, and is something for you to think about regarding your projects, has to do with if you develop or seek to develop a project that requires not only collective action or coordination with organizations. Usually these kind of activities may also involve some source of funding. And depending on the funding source, you may want to broaden your portfolio in terms of options, such that if most of your grant funding or the target of your funding comes from grant sources, and those grant sources don't manifest or are limited in some way, then you need to be able to have some options. But because mental health is important and because these climate change effects not only affect us on a physical level, but also a mental level, the work needs to be done, and it can be done easier when you are working with people who are already doing work in that space. Next slide. Well, yeah, I really wanted to play a game, but that's very hard to do during a webinar. And I think I'll just save that for when you invite me back. But instead, um, I'd like you to think about something. Well, I want to ask you this. What is one small action you can take to support climate and mental health equity in your community? I mean, just take a minute, and we have one, to think about that. It could be something as simple as checking on an elder during a heat wave or some other things. I'll keep my mouth shut just for a minute. But most of you are on a computer or have access to pen and paper, or even not. Just think about it for a minute. What's the one small action you can do? What's the one small action you can take to support climate and mental health in your community? So again, I mean, it could be something as simple as checking on an elder during a heat wave. It could be sharing the Black Church Resilience Toolkit with your pastor, or even asking your clinic director, how are we prepared for climate stress? Whether you drop it in the chat, jot it down, or just hold it in your heart, that one act matters. Next slide. You know, sometimes equity looks like giving yourself grace in the produce aisle. I once set out to make some homemade guacamole from scratch. I'm very California, and I was feeling ambitious as well as eco-conscious. I bought avocados. They looked perfectly ripe, only to discover they were basically green grenades. Um, I tried all the tricks: paper bag, banana, microwave, and don't do that. But nothing worked. So I pivoted. I served chips and salsa and called it deconstructed guacamole. And that, my friends and colleagues, is climate adaptation with seasoning. Remember, community grounds us, culture guides us, and justice, well, justice steers us. You don't have to do everything, but do something. Check on your neighbor during a heat wave. Start a conversation. Bring resilience to the mailbox, the water cooler, the pulpit, the clinic, and the dinner table. We are not powerless in the face of climate chaos. Every small act rooted in care, in culture, in community is all part of the healing.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. That was extraordinary. The stories and the sharing, the combination was wonderful. This is why we do chefs. So personally very proud and appreciative. We may have some questions in the chat, and I'll open the floor up for those questions. I see a hand raised by Dr. Earls, so I will call on her initially.
Dr. Freeman, that was just an outstanding presentation. Question for you. You mentioned about the elderly families, but I'm interested in your thoughts, in your recommendations about children in terms of how would you decrease the amount of stress or assess the stress from a mental health standpoint that they might be feeling about climate change. I think oftentimes, I mean, they don't quite know what it is or have the words to say, but yet still might experience the stress. So what are your suggestions about how to get at that information and then what to do with it?
For sure. Certainly you can look for some online tools even within the realm of psychiatry or psychology in terms of, question and answers to assess anxiety levels. But that's general. Your question is more specific to climate change and its impacts. And we see a lot of climate anxiety in the youth. And yeah, they don't know how to put words to it. Part of it is just to talk to them, and talk about what their experience is. How are things going? I mean, actually, Dr. Earls is a plant because she's my medical school classmate. So, so I know she's a pediatrician or did peds as part of her training. Um, But, even in whether it be peds or child psychiatry, we use tools, whether it be through play, whether it be through art. I know for example, if a child were to come in with, repeated episodes of respiratory distress, asthma exacerbations, the question is, what's going on? How is this affecting you? Are you able to go out and play? I'll tell you a personal story in terms of having suffered severely with asthma as a child. And I can remember days, I mean, I was very little, where, I'd be in the crib, that's how small I was, looking out of the window and watching, all the kids in the backyard just running, jumping, and having a great time. And obviously it's a very vivid memory for me because I wasn't able to do that. And long before we have the advanced medicines now, um, I also had to be very careful related to exerting myself because it might precipitate an asthma episode. So I think that if you are aware that these physical conditions as a result of climate change and the impacts that they have on us, if you understand that they can modify how one lives, how one operates, then I think you can just engage with them. Kids are not easy, but play and also ask them how things going at school. Maybe they were on the football team and they had to get off. If they're at the age where, in school, we played instruments. I wasn't allowed to play the flute because there was a concern that it would be a waste of resources because my asthma was so severe.
Mm,
So sometimes our physical conditions can put limitations on us. And because parents or caregivers or healthcare professionals are more concerned about our physical condition, they don't really take the time to address how it might be impacting their functioning.
mm,
And that holds true for all generations. You know, are you not able to go play in the yard? Are you not? Is the only thing you're doing is sitting on the couch, you
mm.
know, watching videos? Are you not able to go to the dance, not travel? These kind of things. How do you feel about that? And you know, sharing your own story, like I just did.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was
You-
excellent.
We do have another question about what are some of the policy interventions that are most urgently needed to ensure that mental health services are included in climate disaster response plans?
Uh, well, I feel that one of the biggest issues right now related to that has to do with the maintenance of the provision of mental health services. And in so doing, so I'll talk about particularly not just here in California, but also a national level as relates to funding for programs. So we start with that and be also being able to serve as an advocate. I recently returned, recently as in 3 days ago, returned from Washington, D.C. There advocating on behalf of the American Psychiatric Association and talking to legislator staff about the need to continue to funding. I think of SAMHSA and the fact that it may be dismantled or, unfunded. And SAMHSA happens to be a particular website that provides resources for everyone. Even toolkits such as the ones that are integrated into my toolkit are available on this website. So helping people understand the need for funding and to maintain that funding is important. One of the other things I think about is also being able to ensure that telehealth services are maintained, particularly when I think about the work that I do in rural areas where I talked about the farming community and the stresses that they encounter. And given that they're in rural areas, as I said, they may not even have healthcare professionals there. So, especially if they have expertise in mental health. So you want to be able to, from an advocacy policy perspective, ensure that there is adequate um, adequate training sites, adequate clinicians, and in the absence of adequate clinicians, at least making sure there's an infrastructure in place that will facilitate things such as telemedicine. And also as recognizing that not just ensuring that these services are covered, but also making sure that the infrastructure is there. You know, you can have technology, but is it adequate? Do you have an adequate grid? Um, will people be able to interact on a level that allows for them to actually hear one another or see one another. Those are some of the things that I think about and some of the things that I've done most immediately to advocate that patients, particularly in underserved areas, are able to be reached. And we know that those who have been the most disenfranchised are the ones who are going to be most vulnerable to the effects of climate change.
Yeah, one of the comments in the chat had to do with the ballot box. And so could you talk just a moment about the connection between voting and social determinants of health, which has
Right.
been the connection has been made
Sure.
by AA.
Sure. And actually that ties into the previous question in terms of what can you do to advocate around policy as it relates to climate change and specifically mental health. It's important to understand that policy is established by policymakers, and the policymakers get to be policymakers because you have chosen them. And if and the way that you choose them is by voting. And by voting, you can identify what we refer to as climate change champions. What legislation have they authored or co-sponsored? What legislation have they voted upon, supported? Also in terms of who has contributed to their political action fund or their reelection fund. So voting is very important. It is a voice, and you want your voice to be heard and not, visiting your legislator's office or making phone calls or sending emails. That's what's done in between. But if the legislators, the policymakers don't do what you ask of them or what they promise to do, you have the ability to elect someone who will or who does. And so voting is very, very important. And one of the organizations in California that I have been working with is um, Voting for Climate Health. And through that organization, we have been able to, at least within the California Medical Association, our state affiliate of the American Medical Association, identify voting as a social determinant of health that is consistent with AMA policy.
You know, an additional question that we see is how can interdisciplinary collaboration between climate scientists, public health professionals, and mental health providers improve outcomes for these vulnerable communities that you've identified?
Okay, could you say that again?
Yeah, so the collaboration between these other stakeholders. So climate scientists, our
Hmm.
public health professionals, and then our mental health providers who are on the ground and dealing with communities. How can their collaboration improve the outcomes for vulnerable communities?
Well, I made comment about that earlier in terms of you can do more together and having shared experiences. And I think that the best use of energy is not to do things in a vacuum. And mental health professionals are boots on the ground. And mental health professionals or health professionals in general, not just restricted to health professionals, but this is the audience to which I'm speaking. We have to think about the fact that we need the tools and the resources. Um, mental health professionals in general are trusted voices, and being able to use our voice, we also need information. So the climate health scientists give us the data and also have the tools and the resources that we can use to not only educate our patients, we can educate our community, and we can educate policymakers. So it is indeed necessary that we work together because this work requires heavy lifting. And it's only, I believe it's only through working together that we'll be able to accomplish the goal. And that goal is to have a healthy planet and a healing planet.
Thank you. Looking to see if we have any additional questions. And I don't see any. In this, we do have a minute or two extra. And so I would ask you, what has been the most effective strategy that you have used with the church community? And how would you encourage the faith community to continue to amplify the work that they are currently doing?
Mhm. The most effective thing has been to help them realize their role in the mental health of their congregation. Many churches do have health ministries or health ministers, and by collaborating with them, it's a whole lot easier, or there's less resistance in terms of understanding what one might propose. Certainly, if you're a member of a particular faith community, because you're familiar, then what you might want to do in terms of offering the community is better received or easier received. But that's been the main thing, is helping them really understand that. And there are mm, mm, helping them understand that they are not, they don't have to be the experts as relates to mental health, but there are some things that cannot be prayed away. And when you work with a health ministry, they understand that. And so the other piece is making sure that they understand that the head is intimately connected to the body, and that anything that affects the body, and then by best definition affects the head, and they may not necessarily understand the science related to that. Um, However, many of them do, and so the key is just to help them to understand the connection. And if you experience any resistance related to that, just explore what the resistance is about. And again, not to, no, not to, to make sure that they understand that there's a need to work in partnership with mental health professionals and not supplant the church or its role um, in their congregants' life. Because,
Yeah.
I go to church too.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. We could probably continue this discussion for much longer, but we do need to wrap up the session. Thanking you again for your presence and for your work, and for participating in our webinar series. I hope that those who joined us found it useful and helpful. Just as a reminder, our webinar series continues on the second Friday of the month. Our next webinar is November 14th at this same time, and we will cover climate solutions in healthcare and public health systems. Before we leave, we ask that you would take a moment to complete the survey. This link is in the chat, and if you would click on that link and please complete that survey, that would be very helpful to us. This now concludes our session. We again thank Dr. Freeman, and we thank you for joining us. Best wishes for us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.